What happened? The music.
It was as soon as you press low.
Lace.
Good morning.
Hello.
Yellow.
Grace, you look like you're
Grace.
from another religion.
Grace bashed her head in her sleep.
Oh, she sleepwalks. For those who don't know,
She has a mystery bruise on her
she
forehead.
does
And it's yellow. And
do
purple.
things in her sleep that nobody knows about, and that seems to be one of those things. It used to be blue, now it's like purple and black.
It's a rainbow.
It's a rainbow. Oh, well, prettiest rainbow I ever seen.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy Sunday.
Morning, everyone. Welcome. Glad you could join us. It's freezing out here in Durban.
No, it's not.
It's freezing, Dan.
It's
Look
not
at us.
freezing,
I've
it's
got
just
my jacket
cold.
on.
I'm hot.
Ah.
You guys
How have you been running
Yeah,
around?
I'm so hot.
Hey, about you two, you've been running around.
Good morning, Claudia. Good morning, Sharon. How are you,
Sharon, Claude, welcome. What's the weather like in Germany? I'm sure it's better than this over here. Hello, Isabel. Yeah, Mom's on
Good morning,
DJ.
Isabel. I just saw Dad's gangster jacket and now it inspired me. What is that?
It's cold. Okay, cold in Germany. Well, okay. I mean, we've had scorches. Very 10 days of absolute scorches, and now we were driving up to Westwall last night, and it was just ominous, dark, black clouds. -1 degree in Germany. Damn. But anyway, so it's not that bad. But I mean, we got jerseys on. That doesn't happen too often in January here in Durban.
Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah, it is
-1,
quite nice.
Claudia says.
Yeah, that's cold. That's like ice, is it? Ice is at -1 now.
Okay, bye. We
Worse than fridge water. All right, thanks guys. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.
Have a good day.
Have a good
Have a
one.
good day,
Thanks for
guys.
coming.
See you. Bye.
Put something in the offering on your way out. Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
Goodbye.
Just close
Really
the door.
goodbye.
I'm even wearing my tracksuit top. Funny story. I went with a couple of friends in inverted commas. On a kind of a holiday, and I came out in all my glory in my tracksuit. Right, I got the
Adidas top
tracksuit
and bottom matching.
and bottom
right?
matching.
Yeah.
And the comment was, I look like a
Gymnastics.
a gymnastics coach from Ukraine. A Ukrainian gymnastics coach. I don't know why.
They're
At
not
first-
wrong though.
No, well, at first I thought they were commenting on my athleticism.
No, it is the Adidas.
But we all know that was a farce by the time I tried to get up on a snowboard. Anyway, later on I learned that they were mocking me. So, yeah,
I
there we
like
go.
your Adidas
I
tracks.
love this thing. And I never get to wear it in Durban. So, I mean, today is perfect.
Good morning, Lucas.
Lucas, hi Fini. Welcome. So glad you could join us this morning. It is rather cold this morning, so we got a different position, which is
I feel like
under the
screen
awning.
is like this. Is it straight?
Troy,
I think it needs to come.
the screen needs
yes,
adjustment.
Yes.
Oh, no. Is that better?
There,
Oh, okay. I'm sure it bothers some people more than others. But yeah. So just a quick announcement before we start today. This week on Wednesday evening on Facebook, in a private group, we're starting a little study, like a webinar study type of thing, called The Evolution of Satan. So it's going to be awesome. I think. I don't like to
Spoiler alerts? No
spoiler alerts. It's not the traditional view, but I think ultimately we don't want to talk about things that haven't changed our lives. This is something that's changed my life. It really has brought a better perspective for me, and it ends up changing the way you practically live your life. So I know that I can be a little bit theoretical sometimes, but the end of it is always, how do we think and how do we live? So anyway, if you're interested, it's free. I'll leave the in the comments below. I'll leave a link to the group. Apply in Wednesday nights. It's live at 7, but you can watch it anytime, and there might be some notes and some extra articles. If you're interested in the subject, the evolution of Satan, for those of you who are Greek New Testament people, the devil, but we're specifically looking at the Hebrew scriptures. In other words, for
fine.
Mic mode
No,
standard.
that's fine. It was your Bluetooth.
Are
That's
you
why
sure?
it glitched. That's why the mute board.
See,
Are
okay.
we back?
I think we're back.
Give
All
us a
right.
thumbs up, Brenda, Claudia, if you can hear us.
The tone stocks. There must be a error, but anyway. Okay, so I think we're back. I think we can see there we've got a better reception. So we had a look at how love motivates faith and hope, trust and the expectation of beauty, but also how then faith, even according to the New Testament scriptures, faith eventually lands in love. And unless it lands in love, unless it points towards love and actually produces a practical love, it's actually useless. It's missing its point, its purpose. Really is love in the end, and so is hope. So love in that sense, agape love, we'll say, for the God type of love, as opposed to a brotherly love or an erotic love or a friendship love or a pragmatic love or whatever it might be, is superior in the sense that it's almost unattainable, but at the same time it's something we want. You know, it's something you really crave. If you sit and think a little bit, it's something you really need in your love, is that selfless love. Someone to love you in spite of some of the stuff you are and some of the stuff you've done. And so one of the other points we made, and I'll leave it at that, is that the manifestation of love always comes from God, and it really is kind of God's manifestation in the lives of people. So that's kind of where we left off last week. And so today, the topic is obedience is love for beginners. Now, this is going to evoke some emotions from certain people, and maybe you're asking, what do you mean by this, and what angle is this? Well, that's why we're here today. We want to talk about the idea of love in the form of pure obedience. And the book we're going to be using, surprisingly, is going to be the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is one of the most boring books you can ever read as a Christian.
Awesome.
But I will say that after 20 years of reading this book, once I started reading it for what it actually says, it's produced so many questions, so many relevant questions for me about God and about the nature of love, that I found an absolute renewed interest in the book, and have been spending a lot of time in the book. And this is what these two sessions are going to be about. It's probably we won't finish in this session. We won't. These two sessions is going to be an inspection into the book of Deuteronomy and what love looks like in Deuteronomy, and to contrast that to what we see the love, agape love. And agape love is best defined by the crucified love, I guess, if we think about the crucifixion. All right, so we're going to be anchoring it in Deuteronomy, and there's going to be at some point some little bit of history, a little bit of context, and I've given Tori permission to tap out at those moments. And I know that history can be a little bit boring, but the truth is you can't really discuss these books like Deuteronomy in any meaningful way unless you know the history of the book of Deuteronomy, because that's what sets the tone for the concepts. It gives context. Without context, the Bible just becomes a flat aggregate of modern understanding instead of what it was meant to be, and a window into the ancient lives and the journey of people with God. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make today is that a love that is predominantly based on obedience cannot actually be the fullness of agape. So I want you to just think about that for a moment.
That's why you call it saying obedience is love for beginners.
Obedience is love for beginners, because love might start off with obedience, but it most assuredly can't land there. It can't be the fullness of love, a relationship that's only based on obedience. I mean, at a stretch, you could maybe say, and we'll talk about this, but you could maybe say that love based on obedience, depending on how you raise your kids, could find its expression maybe in the relationship between a parent and a very, very young, I would say toddler, probably. That their love takes a form where obedience is expected, depending, as I say again, depending on what your views on raising children I guess for me and Tori, we did raise our children on some of that basis. Like, we expect them to respect our voice and to listen when we talk and to obey us. But most certainly, that cannot be the type of love that is found between me and you. You know, it's actually, you can't have what me and you have if you expected me to be completely obedient and vice versa. So the point is that love that's predominantly motivated by obedience actually can't in its fullness represent the agape love of God. It just can't. It rather mimics or becomes like a master-slave type of, master-servant type of relationship. And the Bible in itself is actually quite clear in the New Testament that we need to graduate beyond the master-servant model when it comes to our relationship with God. Like, the Bible actually explicitly says that. Paul explicitly says we are no longer servants but sons. And so it's a new type of relationship with God that the New Testament opens up. Anyway, that's side note. Obedience looks much more, and we could equate it much more to something between a parent and a child than what we really could use it for the type of love that we want to see between me and you, or between adults, two partners, right? And we also know, and this is, it's kind of drawing on scriptural ideas here, we know that in the New Testament, our relationship with God is one of bride and groom. Our relationship with Jesus is bride and groom. So it's not like we're making up the idea that our love should look like a marriage. That is actually a scripturally induced concept, that the love between us and God through Jesus is actually a marriage relationship, right? So we have license to use that type of metaphor. All right. So I want to use a quick example here to demonstrate. And I thought I'd just use a hypothetical example, but I would like to use our marriage day as an example. I want to run it. All right. So we got married in Belito many, many years ago. Almost 19 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
When I was still skinny.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anyway. Now imagine this. On that day, I'm standing in the front. If you've ever gotten married, you're gonna know what this is. If you've never been married, you already imagined yourself into this situation, I guess, at some point in your life. But I'm standing in the front. I'm waiting. The doors open at the back. It's da 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 da, and here comes this beauty, this vision of beauty, walking in. And at that moment, you realize, sure, this person is going to be mine forever. And I'm speaking from the male perspective because I am predominantly male, I guess. And this vision of beauty comes in, and I'm sure the Tori can tell us what she feels at that moment. But it's this union, this expectation of a love-filled life, and I know we are a little bit over-romantic about what marriage looks like, and it's just going to be lovey-dovey all the way. We know it's exactly not that. But a marriage, anyway. So, waiting, this is a very special day. All your friends, your family are there. Everyone is waiting for these beautiful moments. One of the most beautiful moments in the marriage ceremony, I've done many of them, is the moment of vows. And many people ask me to read their vows out, and I sometimes use standard vows, but you get these special couples that they write their own vows. And it's a very special moment because it's that moment in which you're vowing. Right? Yeah. This is a covenant. This is a contract. It's supposed to be eternal. It's witnessed by heaven, earth, sun, moon, stars, family, what the whole cadoot. And I want you to imagine the moment of vows like this, and tell me what you think of this. So, at the moment of vows, the preacher asked the couple if they'd like to say their own vows, and the husband says, yes, we would like to say our own vows, but I'll be saying the vows for myself and for my wife. And I can imagine Tori's look on her face at that moment. Why are you saying my vows? I said, no, I got this. Yeah, I know how to do this, and I know how to make this marriage work, so this is how we're going to do it. So I take that initiative, And I start like this. To my wife to be, I've got it written down so I don't mess it up completely. I will love you and provide for you and protect you if you promise to obey all my rules without question and exception, and serve and attend to me and only me all of your life and with all of your heart. Now, let me just say that again. I will love you, provide for you, protect you, if you obey me, follow my rules that I've set out for marriage, and serve me and only me all of your life with all of your heart. Okay? You can see some ladies in the audience starting to, scuffle a little bit. This is a little bit one-sided. And I said, no, don't worry, I got this handle. Tori, let me read your vows to me. It's okay, you don't need to take care of it. I'll take care of it for you. And to my wife to be, you will love me with all of your heart. But if you don't love me and obey all my rules and satisfy my requirements for our marriage, or if you misstep by accident or on purpose, I will make your life miserable. I will stop providing for you. I will not protect you any longer. I will stop providing for our children, and I will send them away to fend for themselves. Then I will shame you in front of all your family and friends until you obey me without question or contradiction. Now, this is not what you expect from a modern marriage today. Maybe a medieval one, maybe an ancient one, where women were literally the property of the man they married, right? This you could expect from there, but any sensible modern person won't accept this. In fact, we have a word for these type of relationships, because this is setting itself up to be not a relationship of agape love. This is basically put, this is an abusive relationship waiting to happen, right? What is this even? Well, this to me is a contractual type of love. It's almost like a forced marriage in a sense. Like, you will be my wife, but I will love you but you will love me all. And so really, I'm really in the moment, I'm really threatening you with poverty, dismay, shame. So if you don't do what I want you to do, this is what I'm going to do to you. But you will love me, and you will obey everything that I say, right? And I will only love you if you do that. And then I don't even give you a choice to back out. Because if you back out, I will destroy you anyway. Like, this sounds like a marriage proposal I've seen on something like Vikings or something, on one of those medieval type of arranged marriages of the ancient or the medieval age. It's you will marry me. If you don't, I will destroy you. If you marry me and you don't do what I say, I will destroy you as well. But if I will only love you if you do exactly as I want you to do. Now, this is something this is abuse waiting to happen. And no one with any sense thinks that this will actually work. Especially not in our modern time, especially not if the woman knows that she is not the property of her husband, but is a person in her own right that needs to be loved. And what about her desires and her heart and her wishes and dreams? And what about if she is not loved fully? And what about if the husband goes messing around? There's no clauses put in any for that. All right, so the point is, it's highly one-sided. It's a type of a contractual love. It might be mutually beneficial if the woman in question, and I'm just putting it in this man-woman perspective because it's actually how it historically probably went down. It could be mutually beneficial if the woman was taken off the street right? So I've taken you off the street. So you owe me everything. Now, this is how we're going to do this. You're going to do it like this, then I will love you. You will love me, or I'll put you back on the street. It's that type of relationship. It's really like slavery, basically, to some degree. But this is not a relationship or a marriage that is based on the type of love we see in the crucified Jesus. This is not selfless love.
Yep.
You know, this. In fact, I got a lot of choice words for people that act this way, but at the same time, it's bullying. It's, you can call it many. You can give it a lot of adjectives, but also within ourselves, we sometimes realize that we actually sometimes do this. If I don't get that, then I'm not getting this. It's a selfless instinct. It's the human way of doing relationships, and here. Agape has to be a contrast to this story. There is no way that I can look at this type of marriage and say this is a beautiful agape, godly type of love that's about to unfold here forever. No, this is abuse waiting to happen. Now, this might have been acceptable 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or 700 years ago, or a little bit more. But certainly today, in any respectable society, these are not the vows you hear. These are not the vows people want to make. There might be some men, but most of the men I know in my life, they don't want to make these type of vows. They don't want this type of relationship because they know it's ultimately loveless. And most certainly women don't want this either. And you can flip this thing on its head. Because I think it's also possible for women to have this type of outlook on a marriage. The point is simply that when explained in this way, it becomes obvious to me, and I'm not sure if it's to you, but it becomes obvious to me that this is not the type of love that actually makes it in the end.
Yeah.
Just simply because it's not the agape form of what love actually is, right? So this ends in abusive. It's abusive. One party holds all the power and basically makes the other a slave. That's kind of what's going on here. So this is the type of love, and this is to tie into our topic for today, or the heading, the type of love that's based on obedience. You obey me, I will love you if you obey me. If you don't obey me, I will destroy you. Right?
Yeah.
This is bullying tactics. This is the schoolyard bully that comes up to your child and says, give me your food and I'll leave you alone. But if you don't give me your food, I'm going to hit you in the face. Right? That's that type of love. So I'm going over and over about this because I know you might think, Francis, this is obvious. We understand this. You don't need to say this over and over again. But I'm about to throw something your way that's going to make you think twice. So just bear with me for a moment. So this is kind of the love that, or the relationship type that is based on obedience solely, right?
Yeah.
And only at a stretch could we at best consider it a love for beginners. But this relationship under these conditions can never truly be called love, if we speak about the God type of love, right? It's even hard to make a case nowadays for this type of love as a model between parents and children, because it's just downright oppressive, totalitarian, bullying, and abusive, right? You can't even raise your kids like this today with a clear conscience, right? Now, here's the thing. I'm stating the obvious, and most of you will possibly agree with me up until this point, but it's the next proposition that many Christians will not agree with me on. So here it is. This is the type of transactional love we see in the book of Deuteronomy. Let me say that one more time. This type of love, the one that's predominantly based in obedience under threat of literal death, is the type of love we see in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay. It's a contractual obedience based in transactional affection. Right. So, let me just tell you a little bit about my journey. It's taken me about 19 years, although I was born in the church. I'm a church baby. I was under the pews when I was 2, and I really, for most of my life, knew nothing but church. In 2004, me and Tori became pastors, and so at that point I resorted to, well, this is the truth, I resorted to read nothing but the scripture. Like, that's one of the things I put before me. I said, I'm not going to touch any other books. I'm only touching the Bible for 10 years. But the truth is that it's taken me 19 years. It's taken me 19 years of reading the scripture over and over and over and studying it and preaching from it to finally be resensitized to what the Bible says, especially in places like Deuteronomy, to what it actually says. It's taken me 19 years. And the opposite of resensitized means that for most of my Christian pastoral life, I was desensitized to what it actually says.
So you're saying that stuff that it says that you read that are perhaps shocking or unacceptable, were you did not find shocking or unacceptable?
No.
Is that the desensitized you're talking
Absolutely, absolutely. And you will know, I hope you will know how hard it is to actually read a book like Deuteronomy afresh or resensitized to what it's actually saying. It actually takes time. I don't know, maybe I'm just stupid, but it took me a very, very, very long time. So the point I'm trying to make is that I was desensitized. And the things that desensitized me to what it actually says was the traditions I was born into, right? The way it was viewed, the traditions handed over to me, what was expected of me. I think tied into that is the bias of culture, the bias of religious culture, and my good old friend, peer pressure, of wanting to not step outside, not call the emperor naked when he possibly is wearing nothing, because your job depends on it, people's admiration for you depends on that, the approval of those above you depends on it. And so there are many factors that I believe led to me, in all sincerity, to become completely desensitized to what the book of Deuteronomy is actually saying. I mean, it is quite obvious to me that there are very few Christians that actually read these books in a study of the book.
Yeah, sure.
We grab onto, maybe from Deuteronomy 27, grab a blessing. You know, you'll be blessed in your farm and your pomegranate trees and your vineyards. We grab onto that and in I don't want to call it ignorance or what you want to call it, because we grab onto the blessing, but the next page has got 57 curses on them. So which one do you want? You can't take the one without the other. Anyway, point is just simply that I think it's important for us Christians to read these books again with fresh eyes, to read what it actually is saying, because what it actually is saying is what it was supposed to be saying to us. I know we could never get that perfectly right, but we most surely can rid ourselves of the opinions of people and our efforts to kind of mull over and soften and just read over that verse. God didn't really mean that. We just go on to the next verse where it's beautiful for everyone, and we ignore what it's actually saying to us. And that this is really, for me, it's a very serious matter to call people back to reading, especially Old Testament books like Deuteronomy. I think Deuteronomy is a really good example, and that's where we're going to be spending some time in there, to read it for what it actually is saying. And to help us with that is the historical context of this book, and we'll deal with that a little bit later, and that's probably going to come next week. So my goal in these two sessions, this one and the next one, will be exactly to come up with some answers, to try and explain why the love that's found in Deuteronomy, although we use the same 4-letter English word, which already should be a clue to you, that there's a process that's taken place. This book was written at least 2,400, 600 years ago, but we use an English word, L-O-V-E, which means something completely different to people who live today. That already should tell you we've left the context. The point is that I want to find answers, and this is the reason for these two sessions, to find some answers, some logical, historical answers for why the love in Deuteronomy looks the way it looks.
Yeah.
Why does God approach the Israelites? The setting for the book of Deuteronomy is basically just before they enter the promised land, about 40 years after God initially gave the law to Moses at Exodus. Deuteronomy in the Greek Septuagint means the second law. So it was the implied context was a revisiting of the law given at Sinai or Horeb, now just before they enter the land. So why does this happen? Anyway, the point is to find some answers. Why does the love in Deuteronomy, if we read it plainly, if we read it for what it actually is saying, and not from a Christian retrospective way of interpreting it, why is it so harsh? Why does it not look like agape?
Yeah.
Why does it look so transactional? To be honest, why does it look like a bully, or basically just a king of the ancient world, forcing people to do what he wants them to do? Why does it look like this?
Yeah.
Right? I think I have some answers. I think after so many years of looking, I actually have some answers. And it's not my answers, but I found in the context an answer that makes me think back and say, now I understand.
Now you don't have to ignore stuff.
I don't have to ignore the ugly stuff in there anymore. I can read it for what it is. I still believe it's inspired because it will lead us to perfect love. But I have to in advance say I most definitely don't think this is the type of love we need to be implementing in our governments, in our families, or in our marriages, right? We've got about another 10 minutes or so left here, so let's just see how far we can get with this. Why does Deuteronomy not look like the love we find on the cross? Why? And why should we not attempt? And I think this is very important for me, and I've mentioned it many times. If I've ever had a serious conversation with you about these books, you would always hear me say this. Why should we not attempt to force books like Deuteronomy and the cross, the concept of the cross, or the cross of Jesus, why we should not force them together and make them fit and say, no, they are the same thing, we just don't understand how they are the same thing. No, they are the same thing. It's just above our pay grade. Because that's normally the answer I was given, and which I gave to so many people. Look, yeah, I know it looks like it's not the same thing, but it's just because we don't understand the love of God. And I think it's a cop-out. Now that I think about that, it's a cop-out of not being willing to face what's actually going on in there. So I don't want to do that anymore. We shouldn't be trying to force them together to try and make them be the same thing when they so clearly are not. For so many years of my life as a pastor and a student of the scriptures, because of my unquestionable presuppositions about the Bible, I tried to find or define the love that God is, because we now know from the New Testament God is love. So if you want to find God, one of the things you need to find out is, what does agape love actually look like, right? I tried to define the love of God by calculations. Now, I'm actually an engineer. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a qualified engineer, and I did that before I entered ministry. So I'm mathematically orientated. I'm systematically orientated. I like things in a certain way. And my first instinct is to take Deuteronomy as a data point, and to take John, let's say the book of John, as a data point, and say, okay, love looks like this down here in Deuteronomy, but in John it looks like this. So what I'm going to do sorry, leave your head.
Okay.
I'm sorry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the aggregate, and I'm going to say, this is what love is. It's here somewhere in the middle. Yes, it is selfless, but it can bully if it needs to. Like, yes, it is a selfless giving of myself, but if I have to threaten, it's okay, because we do have Deuteronomy. In all my Christian life, I calculated this average of these which I now understand to be very different understandings of God and well, love and therefore God. And I rebranded it as a type of love that I and the people of the congregation need to aspire to. What I now know is that this approach left me basically in no man's land when it comes to love. My goal was too low. It left me in no man's land. I was invigorated by the love of Jesus and at the same time absolutely paralyzed and held back by the Deuteronomic type of love. The one that is allowed to threaten, the one that is allowed to bully, the one that is allowed to withhold if it is not self-satisfied, the one that will only have mercy on those that do things for it. And the reality of this, and I think this really hit me while I was writing early this morning, this really hit me because I know that this paralyzed me spiritually. It paralyzed all my progress into the understanding of God. And I also know today that it also paralyzed even practical areas of my life, like my marriage. Because I want to be selfless, but it's okay for me to also be like Deuteronomy. It's also okay for me to say, oh, you don't want to do that? Well, then I'm not going to do this. I was paralyzed in that place and held captive by the average when I should have been following Jesus all along. Right? And I think this really hit home while I was just writing this morning, that even in my marriage and I think in my relationship, not only towards my wife and my children, but also towards congregants, people in our church, I lived in this average type of love where kind of principle was above people, which is something which Agape doesn't do, but Deuteronomy is quite happy to live there. Anyway, it's a confession. If love is as important as we suspect it is, this type of approach of averaging everything is actually going to get you stranded. And spiritually, it's going to get you stranded. And you know what? Yeah. It really doesn't matter how many awesome gifts you have. If the fruit of love is not present, those things become a clanging cymbal. I was about to say a buttload of noise. A lot of noise that has no purpose in the end. And so here, the point is simply, Tori, that if we get stranded in our concept of love, we get stranded in all spheres of spiritual growth and spiritual progress. And one of the reasons we do get stranded is we're reading the Bible incorrectly. We're reading it from our traditions. We're reading it from peer pressure. We're reading it from what's been imparted to us since we've been 3 years old. We're not reading it for what it actually says.
And you're saying Deuteronomy, but I think a very common dichotomy or a common wrestle is saying, the God of the Old Testament doesn't look or sound like the God of the New Testament. It's been that, and people don't know where to land that.
Yeah, well, I think the church has struggled with that for centuries. I mean, there was even people which I don't agree with, and I know some people are going to accuse me of this, but I don't agree with this viewpoint. I think it was a man by the name of Marcion, a Marconian way of thinking in the very early church period, where this guy came to the conclusion that the God of the Old Testament is not the God, the Father of Jesus, and the God of the Old Testament is actually some evil, force, demon type thing, and Jesus is God. Jesus' Father is actually God, so they're two different gods. I don't believe that at all, but I do believe the answer lies in the way that we read Deuteronomy, and this is what I want to focus on in our next session, right? So, when we read the scriptures, and I'm kind of reiterating what I've already said, but I really believe this is important. When we read the scriptures in a type of a superficial way, which could be very sincere, and I speak from experience, but it's superficial, it's kind of shallow, it's not doing enough homework about it, or to look at the context. Love kind of means the same thing everywhere we find it. So when you find the word L-O-V-E, given to us by King James's merry men in the 16th century, or 17th century, it means exactly the same thing that when John speaks about it. And that just doesn't make sense, because words L-O-V-E, in the old Hebrew, it wasn't L-O-V-E, it was something completely different. The context was different. And one of the famous portions from Deuteronomy, of course, is you shall love the Lord your God. And we just automatically assume that L-O-V-E there is the same as the one we find in for God so loved the world that we find in John 3:16. That is a mistake. It's a I think it's called an acronistic mistake, which means we applying modern ideas to ancient things, and we pretend like there's no time that went on beyond in between these words, and we just assume. And the worst mistake we make is we assume that all of those appearances throughout 1,000 years of writing all mean exactly what we think it means. That's a mistake, and we make that all the time. But that comes with a very superficial way, shallow way of reading the scriptures. When we take the scripture more seriously, we realize that the concept of love displayed in a book like Deuteronomy might not actually be the concept of love that we find in the book of John. It might actually be the same thing. Although our translators gives us the same L-O-V-E, it's not actually the same thing. It doesn't bear the same weight. It doesn't think the same. It doesn't look the same. It might both be rooted in the idea of affection, which we know that the book in Deuteronomy, the Hebrew word for love there means an affection. Which could be sexual or otherwise, but affection comes really short when we're talking about agape, because we can take all the Greek ideas of love and they all involve affection: brotherly love, erotic love, pragmatic love. What are the other ones? I can never remember more than 4, but there's 7. All of them involve affection, and so does agape, but agape goes way beyond affection for something. And so there is a possibility that what is meant by love in Deuteronomy is actually not the same thing that we find in, for instance, the New Testament. Right? Okay. So, back to the book of Deuteronomy. And I need to end because my time is up. So I want to end here, and I hope I've said enough to make you come back next week, because next week I want to spend time. Next week I want to spend time in the book of Deuteronomy itself. I want to look at the appearances of the word love. Where does it come? Where do we see it? What does it mean? What are the conditions attached to it? And then I want to go into the part I really want to get into, and that is the context of the book of Deuteronomy. Then we're going to do a little bit of history, Tori. Maybe now you'll not tap out in the history. I don't know.
I'm quite interested now.
Oh, okay. But that's when it gets really interesting, because that's where I believe we find an answer for why this book looks like this, why it makes God look like this, when we find something else in the New Testament. I'm ending here. My time is up. Guys, thank you so much for being, thank you, Tori. Thanks for being with us this Sunday morning. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon. I challenge you to go read the book of Deuteronomy this week. I challenge you to read this book slowly and to think about what you're reading, and to try and get your pastor's voice out of your head while you're reading it. And face it for the first time in your life. It's a very, very frightening place. It's a dark, dark forest. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Have a wonderful afternoon. All the best to everyone. Cheers, guys. Press the button, baby. Oh my word, can't press the button.
I'm pressing it.